It's another big weekend of international rugby, and the main story in France is, can Les Bleus end a difficult year on a high by beating Argentina this evening in Paris? Some in France say the game shouldn't be taking place in the capital at all, as most of the team either play for clubs in the south or are from the south themselves. Two of Les Bleus play for Montpellier, where people have been hearing another story about the connection between their local rugby club and a billionaire immigrant from Syria. Chris Bockman says they need each other for different reasons.
I'd never met a billionaire before. I had thought the self-made ones in particular might be pugnacious, outspoken, domineering and blunt, reminding you that you were using up valuable minutes of their day. So I was a little surprised Mohed Altrad's press officer gave me the man's mobile phone number and said I could call him any time. I was even more stunned when he answered the phone himself and didn't seem in the slightest put out. Don't get me wrong, Mr. Altrad has all the trappings of a very wealthy man, from his English-style mansion quaintly called Le Cottage, surrounded by huge walled gardens in the centre of Montpellier, with an amazing swimming pool and a Lamborghini parked in the front. His workplace nearby is a converted manor house, but there's nothing to indicate it's the corporate headquarters for a company with 8,000 employees in 100 countries. Mr. Altrad himself speaks very softly in precise French with a strong Middle Eastern accent, but he's a shy man. I bet he'd make a great poker player, because it's hard to imagine him the tough guy negotiator in his hardball field, the construction industry. He was born in a Bedouin tent close to the city of Raqqa in Syria. He doesn't know when or how old he is. In a poke at the bureaucrats who wouldn't give him a French passport without him declaring his birth date, he tells me he gave them a different date for each of the 3 passports he's held. His mother died soon after his birth, and he was passed around their desert tribe throughout his childhood. But there was a stroke of luck. Promising students across Syria were given a chance to study abroad. He seized his and came to France in 1970. Through hard work and willpower, he built up what's become the biggest scaffolding company in the world. The local rugby club Montpellier reckoned he could be their saviour. The city already has a first division football side, a highly successful handball club, and the rugby team. The place just didn't seem big enough for 3 high-level sports, and the rugby club was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. So when, cap in hand, it went to the billionaire with an emergency request for €3 million, you could say the club was being audacious, especially as Altrad had never seen a rugby game in his life and certainly didn't know the rules. But the gamble paid off. He not only handed over the money, but became a diligent, hard-working club president. He now knows the rules of the game, goes to all the home fixtures, and scrutinizes the accounts. The club is now close to breaking even, but he wants his players to win titles, and that means hiring new talent. He already has a former French rugby captain, Fabien Galtier, as manager, and the former Australian captain, Ben Moen, has just joined. It was Mohed Altrad who scouted him and asked him to move to France. But don't think Mr. Altrad is doing all this out of charity. He says it's down to one thing. When he arrived in Montpellier, he was given a second chance, and this is his way of saying thank you. In his words, he's sending the lift back down for others. But even though he's been awarded the Légion d'honneur, the French equivalent of a knighthood, he says he still doesn't feel entirely accepted in French society. He told me whenever he's introduced to anyone in the French establishment, he's always the businessman from Syria, and never a French citizen in his own right. He says that has always bothered him. He doesn't believe that will ever change. It's clear that by linking up with the cosy traditional world of French rugby, he's trying to find another way of fitting in. He hasn't returned to Syria since 1972, and the area where he grew up is now a stronghold of the jihadis from the so-called Islamic State. He admits he feels helpless in exile. One doesn't think of tycoons being sentimental, but Mohed Altrad is not a typical member of the billionaires' club. He keeps a small jar of Syrian sand in his home, and in his spare time writes novels which feature individuals living wretched lives in the desert, before tortuous new beginnings in faraway exile. Lives, in other words, like his own.
Chris Bachman in Montpellier.